His name was Fred Bosch. He was 38 years old, and 3 weeks ago, he discovered that his entire marriage might be built on a lie. So he decided to burn it all down to find the truth. For 8 years, Fred had believed he'd married his soulmate. Marina was beautiful, charming, intelligent, and had walked into his life at a tech conference in Austin back in 2016 when he was just starting to make real money as an independent software consultant. She'd been working in pharmaceutical sales at the time, ambitious and driven, presenting at the same conference about digital healthcare solutions. They'd met at the hotel bar after the first day of sessions, and they'd clicked immediately over shared frustrations about corporate politics and dreams of building something meaningful. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. 6 months of long-distance dating between Seattle and San Francisco, where she'd been based. Countless flights, weekend getaways, late-night video calls where they'd talk until dawn. Fred had never felt so alive, so understood, so seen by another person. Marina seemed to appreciate everything about him: his work ethic, his humble origins, his determination to build something from nothing. Their wedding a year later had been everything he dreamed of: an intimate ceremony in Napa Valley, just close friends and family, held at a small vineyard as the sun set over the rolling hills. Marina had cried reading her vows, promising to stand by him through success and failure, wealth and poverty, joy and sorrow. Fred had believed every word. He'd thought he'd found his forever person, his partner in building a life together. Now, standing in his home office in their Ballard neighborhood house in Seattle on a Tuesday afternoon in late November 2024, listening to a conversation through the baby monitor he'd accidentally left on in the kitchen downstairs, Fred felt his entire world crack down the middle. "I'm just saying, if Fred's business slows down, I'm not sticking around to find out what 'for worse' actually means." Marina's voice drifted through the speaker, crystal clear and casual, like she was discussing what to have for dinner. She was talking to her sister, Vanessa, who'd flown in from Portland for the weekend and had stayed a few extra days. "I married up, Van, and I plan to stay up. That's just reality. That's just being smart about life." Vanessa laughed, that knowing sister laugh that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. "God, Becca, you're so pragmatic. I mean, I love it, but what if he hears you? What if someone else hears you say stuff like that?" "He won't hear me. He's locked in that office working on some boring contract proposal for like 6 hours straight. That's what he does. Works, works, works." "Which is great because that's what pays for all of this," Marina said, and Fred could hear the clink of a wine glass, could picture her gesturing around their expensive kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. "Besides, I've played the devoted wife for 8 years. I think I've earned the right to be honest about what actually keeps me here. It's not like I'm a bad person. I'm just realistic." "So what would you do? If his income dropped, I mean?" Vanessa asked, curious, not judgmental. "I'd leave," Marina said simply, matter-of-factly, like she was describing what she'd do if a restaurant served her bad food. "I'd file for divorce, take my half of everything we've built, and find someone more stable. Someone with a guaranteed income, not someone gambling everything on being an independent consultant. I've already thought about it, honestly. I have lawyers I could call tomorrow if I needed to." Fred's hand had frozen on his mouse. The contract proposal on his screen, a detailed technical document for a major client worth $180,000 over the next year, blurred as those words replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't stop hearing. "I married up. I'm not sticking around to find out what 'for worse' actually means. I'd file for divorce tomorrow." If you enjoy stories of shocking betrayals, cold-blooded gold diggers, and devastating revenge, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense and interesting than the last one you watched, and tell me where you are watching from and what is interesting about your city. The thing was, Fred hadn't always been up. His story was the classic American bootstrap narrative, except it was real, not some motivational poster fantasy. He'd grown up in a trailer park outside Spokane, Washington, raised by a single mom named Patricia, who worked 2 jobs, day shift at a nursing home as a CNA, night shift cleaning offices, to keep him fed, clothed, and believing he could be more than his circumstances. His mom had died of breast cancer when he was 25, just 2 months before he met Marina. She'd never seen him succeed, never seen him climb out of poverty, never got to meet the woman he'd marry. But she'd instilled in him a ferocious work ethic and an unshakable belief that education and determination could change your life. Fred had taken those lessons and run with them. He'd put himself through community college, working full-time at a computer repair shop while carrying a full course load. He'd transferred to Washington State University on academic scholarships and student loans that had taken him 7 years to pay off. He taught himself advanced programming languages in his spare time, built a portfolio of projects, networked relentlessly at tech meetups and conferences. By the time he met Marina in 2016, he was finally making good money, about $180,000 a year as an independent consultant, helping mid-sized companies optimize their software infrastructure. It was comfortable, secure, but he was hardly wealthy. He was still driving a used Honda Civic, still living in a modest apartment, still being careful with money because he remembered what it was like to have none. Marina had known all of this. He'd told her everything on their third date, opening up about his childhood, his mom's death, the years of struggle. He'd cried talking about his mother, about how he'd promised himself at her funeral that he'd make something of his life to honor her memory, to prove that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Marina had held him that night in her San Francisco apartment, stroking his hair, telling him she admired his strength, his work ethic, his determination to build something meaningful. She'd said his background made him who he was, made him real in a way so many privileged tech guys weren't. She'd said she loved him not despite where he came from, but because of what it had made him. Or so he'd thought. Now sitting in his office, listening to his wife casually discuss her exit strategy with her sister, Fred felt something fundamental break inside him. Had any of it been real? Had she ever actually loved him? Or had he just been a financial opportunity from the start? A guy with potential earning power who she could mold into the lifestyle she wanted? He thought about their relationship timeline through this new, darker lens. When had she decided he was worth investing in? Was it when he mentioned landing a $200,000 contract in their second month of dating? Was it when he told her about his expansion plans, his dreams of growing his consulting business into something bigger? Now his business was doing exceptionally well. The hard work, the long hours, the networking, it had all paid off. His consulting firm, which was really just him and 2 contractors he hired for specialized projects, had landed 3 major tech contracts in the past year. His annual income had jumped to around $450,000. They just bought this beautiful house in Ballard, a trendy Seattle neighborhood with tree-lined streets, waterfront parks, and million-dollar homes, with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, and a price tag of $1.2 million. Marina had insisted on the interior designer, the luxury furniture from that expensive boutique in downtown Seattle, the whole package. She'd spent $60,000 on furnishings alone, another $25,000 on window treatments and rugs, $15,000 on art for the walls. Fred had been happy to give her everything, happy to see her excited about building their home together. Except now he realized she wasn't building their home. She was building her lifestyle, bankrolled by his work. The conversation in the kitchen continued. Vanessa was asking about their future plans, whether Marina thought Fred would keep growing the business. "Oh, he'll keep working hard," Marina said confidently. "That's what guys like Fred do. They have something to prove. He'll probably hit $600,000 or $700,000 in the next few years if he keeps landing clients like Hartwell Technologies. And I'll be right there, supporting him, being the perfect wife, hosting dinners for his clients, networking for him. That's my job, to help him succeed so we can maintain this lifestyle." "You make it sound so transactional," Vanessa observed. "Because it is transactional," Marina replied, and Fred could hear the shrug in her voice. "Marriage is a partnership. He provides financial security and upward mobility. I provide domestic management, social capital, companionship. It's not romantic, but it's honest. The problem is, most people lie to themselves about it. I'm just clear-eyed." "But do you love him?" Vanessa asked. There was a pause, a long enough pause that Fred held his breath, hoping, praying for the answer that would make this all make sense. That would explain this conversation as just cynical venting that didn't reflect her real feelings. I love what he provides, Marina said finally. I love the life we have. I love not worrying about money. I love this house, our vacations, the security. Do I love him? I don't know, Van. I'm not sure I know what that even means anymore. I care about him. I don't want bad things to happen to him. But if he lost everything tomorrow? No, I wouldn't stay out of love. I'd stay if there was a path back to financial stability, and I'd leave if there wasn't. Fred closed his laptop carefully, precisely, with the kind of controlled movement that comes when you're afraid if you move too quickly, you'll break something, or someone. He sat in his office for another 2 hours after that conversation ended, staring at the wall, replaying 8 years of marriage through this new lens. Every memory, every moment, every expression of love, all of it potentially calculated, transactional, conditional on his continued financial success. He thought about her reaction when he'd landed the big Hartwell Technologies contract 8 months ago, the one that had pushed his income over $400,000 for the first time. She'd been thrilled, absolutely thrilled. They'd gone out to celebrate at Canlis, Seattle's most expensive restaurant, where dinner for two had cost $600. She'd ordered champagne, held his hand across the table, told him how proud she was of him. At the time, he'd thought she was celebrating his success, his achievement. Now he realized she might have just been celebrating the upgraded lifestyle that success would fund. He thought about how she'd been pushing him lately to work more, to take on bigger clients, to maximize his potential. Her exact words. She framed it as believing in him, as wanting him to achieve his dreams. But maybe she just wanted him to make more money. Maybe he was just a resource to be optimized. The rational part of Fred's brain told him to confront her directly, to walk downstairs right now and ask her what the hell that conversation meant. But another part of him, the part that had survived poverty by learning to trust his instincts, to see through people's words to their real motivations, knew that direct confrontation would only lead to denials, explanations, maybe even gaslighting. People who used others for money were expert liars. They had to be. If Marina was who he now feared she was, she'd explain it all away. She'd cry, tell him he misunderstood, that he'd taken her words out of context. She'd say she was just venting, just having a cynical moment with her sister, that of course she loved him. She'd make him feel guilty for even questioning her, for violating her privacy by listening to a private conversation. And maybe, just maybe, he'd believe her. Because he wanted to believe her. Because 8 years of shared history, of built life, of mutual investment was hard to throw away based on one overheard conversation. But Fred knew himself. He knew that even if he accepted her explanations, even if they moved past this moment, the doubt would always be there. Every time she kissed him, every time she said, "I love you," every time she supported one of his business decisions, he'd wonder, is this real or is this transactional? He couldn't live like that. He needed to know the truth, and he knew exactly how to find it. Over the next 5 days, Fred became an actor in his own life, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband while his mind worked constantly on the plan. He treated Marina exactly as he always had, affectionate, attentive, communicative. He gave her no indication that anything had changed, that he'd heard anything, that his entire understanding of their marriage had shifted. Meanwhile, he began laying careful groundwork. He started coming home from work stressed, complaining about business problems in ways he never had before. He'd always been the type to leave work problems at the office, to maintain separation between his professional stress and his home life. But now he made sure Marina heard about contract disputes, difficult clients, potential complications. Hartwell's pushing back on some of the technical specifications in the contract. He mentioned one evening over dinner at their dining room table, watching her face carefully. Hartwell Technologies was his biggest client, responsible for about $180,000 of his annual income, 40% of his total revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic for his business. Marina's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes sharpening with attention. What? Why would they do that? They're saying some of the infrastructure improvements I implemented don't meet the original specifications in the contract. It's complete bullshit, I have emails proving we discussed and agreed to the changes, but they're threatening to withhold payment and possibly sue for breach of contract. He rubbed his temples like he was developing a stress headache, selling the performance. Their new CTO apparently doesn't like decisions the previous CTO made, and I'm caught in the middle. Her face had gone pale, her appetite visibly disappearing. That's serious. How much money are we talking about? Not. How are you feeling? Or that's so stressful, or what can I do to help you through this? The first question out of her mouth was about the money. About $120,000 for this year's contract alone, Fred said quietly, precisely, watching her process the number. Plus, if they actually sue for breach of contract, legal fees could run anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 or more, depending on how long it drags out. And the publicity could damage my reputation with other clients. In a worst-case scenario, I could lose multiple contracts. Marina set down her fork carefully, her dinner apparently forgotten. Fred could see her mind working, calculating, assessing the financial damage. But we have savings, right? We have emergency funds? We'll be okay? We have some savings, Fred said, choosing his words carefully. This was the crucial moment, the setup for everything that would come later. About $75,000 in liquid emergency funds. But that won't cover much if this turns into extended litigation. We'll need to cut back on some things, obviously. Cancel non-essential spending. Might need to put the kitchen remodel on hold. Marina had been planning an extensive kitchen renovation. She'd already hired an interior designer, picked out Italian Carrara marble countertops, custom German cabinetry, professional-grade appliances. The budget she'd presented him was $85,000, which he'd approved without hesitation 2 months ago when business was booming. For how long, she asked, her voice tight. How long would we need to pause the renovation? Not are you going to be okay or we can get through this together. How long until she could resume spending his money on luxury renovations? I don't know, Beck. Could be months while we sort through the legal issues. Could be longer if other clients get spooked and start pulling contracts. He reached across the table for her hand, a gesture of connection, of solidarity, of partnership in facing adversity together. But we'll get through this together, right? That's what marriage is about. She let him take her hand, but her hand felt limp, unresponsive, like she was tolerating his touch rather than returning it. Of course, she said, but her voice sounded hollow, automatic. Of course we will. That night, Fred lay awake next to his sleeping wife. Or pretending to sleep wife, he couldn't tell anymore. His heart heavy with a terrible certainty. Her reaction had told him everything he needed to know. No words of encouragement, no assurance that money didn't matter, that they were partners who'd face anything together. Just immediate, transparent concern about their financial situation, about what luxury she'd have to sacrifice. But he had to be absolutely sure. He had to take the test further, deeper, until there was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Because if he was going to blow up his marriage based on suspicions, he needed ironclad certainty that he was right. The next morning, Fred called his lawyer and oldest friend, Chester Alvarado. They'd gone to community college together in Spokane, stayed close through everything. Through Fred's transfer to university while Chester went to law school, through Chester's difficult divorce 5 years ago, through all the ups and downs of building careers and lives, Chester was one of the few people who knew where Fred really came from, who understood the significance of everything he'd built, who'd attended his mother's funeral and helped him through that grief. I need your help with something, Fred said, sitting in Chester's downtown Seattle office with its view of Elliott Bay. Something that might sound absolutely insane. Chester leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, his sharp lawyer's mind already working. I'm listening. Fred laid it all out. The overheard conversation with Vanessa, his suspicions about Marina's real motivations for being in the marriage, his plan to stage a complete financial collapse to test whether she'd stay with him when the money disappeared. Chester listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned and more thoughtful as Fred talked, processing not just the story, but the legal implications. You're talking about lying to your wife, Chester said when Fred finished, creating an elaborate fiction, a staged crisis, to test her character and her commitment. You understand how this could backfire in about 17 different ways? I understand that I need to know the truth, Fred said firmly, his jaw set. If I'm wrong, if she really does love me for who I am and not what I have, then I'll come clean about the test and we'll work through it with couples therapy or whatever it takes. But if I'm right, Chester, if she really is with me for the money and the lifestyle, I need to know before I waste any more years of my life on someone who sees me as an ATM machine. Chester was quiet for a long moment, studying his oldest friend. And if you're right, if she fails this test, what then? Then I divorce her, Fred said simply, and I make sure she doesn't get to rob me in the process. Chester nodded slowly, understanding. Okay, if you're really committed to doing this, let's do it right. You'll need documentation, witnesses, legal protection, everything airtight and defensible. Because if she is what you think she is, and if she does what you think she'll do when she believes the money's gone, you're going to need to protect yourself legally and financially. What do you mean? I mean, Chester said carefully, leaning forward, that if someone is with you purely for money and they suddenly believe that money is gone or going away, they might do desperate, irrational things. Drain accounts, hide assets, maybe even try to position themselves advantageously for divorce before you can protect yourself. We need to make sure you're protected. Over the next week, Fred and Chester constructed an elaborate but believable financial disaster scenario. They created fake legal documents showing litigation from Hartwell Technologies. Chester drafted official-looking demand letters from a fictional law firm called Patterson and Burke LLP, representing Hartwell, with detailed claims of breach of contract and demands for financial remediation. They created manipulated bank statements showing Fred's business accounts frozen due to the pending legal dispute. Fred even went so far as to commission a friend who owned a small web development company to create a fake local Seattle Business News website story headlined "Local Tech Consultant Faces, Major Lawsuit from Fortune 500 Client." It was thorough, convincing, featured a professional website design, and was utterly false. But it was necessary. He had to know who his wife really was. On a Tuesday evening in late November 2024, as rain pounded against the windows of their Ballard house, Fred came home carrying the folder of fabricated legal documents. He found Marina in the living room, scrolling through her phone, probably looking at interior design inspiration for the kitchen remodel she was already mentally planning. She looked up when he entered, and his defeated expression must have registered immediately because her face shifted into wariness. "We need to talk," he said quietly, heavily, like a man carrying unbearable weight. Marina set down her phone, her posture instantly defensive. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Fred sat down across from her, the folder feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. "Hartwell made it official today. They're filing a lawsuit against me for breach of contract. My business accounts, all of them, are frozen pending the litigation proceedings. And it gets worse." He watched her face as he methodically laid out the fabricated disaster, the house of cards he'd built to test her. His other two major clients, TechBridge Solutions and Evergreen Systems, had gotten nervous about the lawsuit and pulled their contracts, citing morality clauses and risk management. His business liability insurance might not cover the specific type of claims Hartwell was making. His lawyer, Chester, playing his assigned role, was estimating legal costs could run anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000. "I'm essentially broke, Beck," Fred said, letting his voice crack just slightly, injecting real emotion into the fabricated crisis. "Everything we've built, everything I've worked for since I was a kid in that trailer park, it could all be gone. We might have to sell the house just to cover the legal fees. I might have to declare bankruptcy and start over from nothing." He'd expected shock, concern, maybe even tears, support, comfort, partnership. What he saw instead stopped his heart cold. Marina's face cycled through a rapid series of expressions. Shock? Yes. But then flashing anger? Then something that looked disturbingly like disgust before she managed to school her features into something resembling sympathetic concern. "Oh my God, Fred," she said, but her voice sounded flat, mechanical, like she was reading lines from a script she hadn't rehearsed. "How could you let this happen?" Not "this is terrible" or "we'll figure this out together" or "I'm here for you." How could you let this happen? Like he'd personally betrayed her by losing money. Like financial setback was a character flaw, a personal failing. "These things happen in business, Beck," Fred said, watching her carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. "I thought I had everything covered, every contingency planned for. But sometimes—" "You thought," Marina interrupted, standing up abruptly, her phone clattering onto the coffee table. "You thought—" "Jesus Christ, Fred, this is our life, our future, our security. How could you be so careless with something this important?" There it was, the mask completely slipping, not even 2 full minutes into the conversation, and her concern was entirely, transparently, nakedly about what this meant for her lifestyle, her security, her future. Not for him, not for his well-being, not for their partnership. "I need some air," she said, grabbing her purse from the hook by the door. "I need to think. I need to process this." She walked out of the house without another word, without asking if he was okay, without offering any kind of comfort or support or solidarity. Fred sat in the living room, listening to her car pull out of the driveway with a screech of tires, and felt something inside him go cold and numb. He'd hoped to be wrong. God, how desperately he'd hoped to be wrong. But Marina's reaction had confirmed his worst fears. And what she was about to do in the next 3 hours would prove just how right he was to test her, and how essential Chester's legal protections were about to become. Marina returned to the house at 9:47 p.m. that Tuesday night. Fred had been tracking the time obsessively, sitting in the living room with his laptop open, pretending to review the fake legal documents while actually documenting everything that had happened. Timestamps, Marina's exact words, her reactions, his observations. Chester had been emphatic about keeping detailed contemporaneous notes of everything for potential legal proceedings. When the front door opened, Fred looked up to see Marina enter, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, mid-40s, with silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of polished corporate appearance that screamed high-end financial advisor or attorney. Fred had never seen this man before in his life. "Fred, this is Gregory Morrison," Marina said, her voice cool and professional, completely devoid of the warmth she'd used with him for 8 years. It was like listening to a stranger. "He's a financial consultant I've worked with previously. I asked him to come review our situation and advise us on protecting our assets." Fred stood slowly, confusion and alarm bells ringing in his mind. "Becca, it's almost 10 o'clock at night, and we haven't even had a chance to discuss any of this privately. Why would you—" "There's nothing to discuss," Marina said, cutting him off with a dismissive wave. "We need to understand the full scope of the damage you've caused and take immediate steps to protect what assets we still have before they're all frozen or seized. Gregory has extensive experience with situations exactly like this." Gregory Morrison stepped forward, extending a manicured hand with an expensive watch glinting at his wrist. "Mr. Bosch, I understand you're facing some serious legal challenges. Marina reached out to me this evening and explained the situation. I've worked with her in the past on financial planning, and she asked me to help assess your current position and advise on the best steps forward to protect your household assets from creditors and legal judgments." Fred shook the offered hand automatically, his mind racing. "Household assets," he repeated slowly, testing the words. "You mean our shared marital assets, mine and Marina's together?" "Of course," Gregory said smoothly, his smile professional and practiced. "That's exactly what I meant. Now, Marina mentioned your business accounts are frozen and you're facing a significant lawsuit. Do you have complete documentation of your current liquid assets? Joint bank accounts, savings accounts, investment portfolios, retirement accounts? I'll need access to all of it to properly advise you." Fred looked at his wife. She was standing with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, watching him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. There was no warmth there, no concern for his well-being, no partnership, just cold, hard calculation and something that looked disturbingly like resentment. "I think we should discuss this privately first, Marina," Fred said carefully, keeping his voice measured, "before we bring in outside consultants to review our private financial information. I think we're well past that point, Marina said, her tone sharp. You made decisions, careless, reckless decisions that put us in this position. Now I need to make decisions to protect myself and my interests. Protect myself, not protect us, not protect our marriage or protect our family. Herself, her interests. Fred felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. This wasn't shock or panic. This was a plan already in motion. Marina had left the house for 3 hours and returned with a financial consultant at 10 o'clock at night. That wasn't panic. That was calculated action. It's late, Fred said firmly, his jaw tightening. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you coming out on short notice, but this isn't an appropriate time for this kind of meeting. Marina and I need to talk first, privately as spouses. We can schedule something with you later if we decide we need outside financial advice. Gregory glanced at Marina, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Of course, I understand completely, Gregory said smoothly. These situations are always stressful and emotional. Marina, why don't you call me tomorrow morning and we'll set up a proper appointment? I can bring my team and we can do a comprehensive review. He handed her a business card, expensive cardstock with embossed lettering, and then extended his hand to Fred again. Mr. Bosch, I hope we can help you navigate through this difficult time. The moment the door closed behind Gregory Morrison, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Marina turned on Fred, her eyes flashing with anger. What the hell was that? Why did you send him away? What was that? Fred shot back, his own anger rising to meet hers. You disappeared for 3 hours, came back with some stranger I've never met, and expected me to hand over all our private financial information without discussion? Without even talking to me first about why you thought that was necessary? Someone needs to think clearly here, Marina snapped, her voice rising. Someone needs to act like an adult and protect what we have left. You obviously aren't capable of rational thought right now, given that you're facing a massive lawsuit that could destroy everything because you couldn't manage a simple corporate contract correctly. So you called a financial consultant? Fred pressed, watching her carefully. To do what exactly? To protect our assets? From what? Marina's eyes narrowed dangerously. To make sure that when your business goes completely under and creditors come calling, I'm not dragged down with you. To make sure I have options. To make sure I'm protected legally and financially from your professional failures. Protected from me, Fred said quietly. Not protected with me. From me. Don't twist my words, Marina hissed. I'm trying to be practical. One of us has to be. And here I thought, for better or worse, actually meant something, Fred said, his voice bitter. I thought it meant we faced hard times together, as partners. Not that you'd start protecting yourself the second things got difficult. Don't you dare, Marina said, her voice low and furious. Don't you dare throw wedding vows in my face when you're the one who screwed up. You promised me a certain kind of life, Fred. I gave up things for you, career opportunities, advancement in pharmaceutical sales, my own ambitions, to support you while you built your consulting business. And now what? We're supposed to lose everything, go back to poverty, struggle like you did growing up, all because you couldn't handle a simple client relationship? Fred felt something fundamental breaking inside him, but he kept his voice level. What opportunities did you give up, exactly? You quit your pharmaceutical sales job after we got married because you said you hated the corporate politics and the travel. You said you wanted to find yourself, explore different options, maybe start your own business. I supported that decision completely. I never asked you to give up anything. I gave up security, Marina shot back. I gave up a stable paycheck and corporate benefits. I could have stayed in pharmaceuticals, worked my way up to regional manager, had a guaranteed salary and stock options. I could have married someone with a stable corporate job, someone with a guaranteed income and a pension, not someone who gambles everything on being an independent consultant in a volatile, unstable industry where one lawsuit can destroy you. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Fred should do next. The words hit Fred like physical blows, each one landing with brutal precision. Someone with a stable job, a guaranteed income. As if everything he'd built from absolutely nothing, from that trailer park in Spokane to a thriving consulting business, wasn't stable, wasn't real, wasn't enough. "I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight," Marina said, her voice icy and final. "I need space. I need to think clearly without you hovering around looking pathetic." She turned and walked up the stairs without waiting for a response, her footsteps heavy and deliberate. Fred heard the master bedroom door close, then lock. He sat in the living room alone, his fake crisis suddenly feeling devastatingly real in its emotional impact, staring at the life he'd built and watching it reveal itself as something hollow. He waited 15 minutes to make sure Marina wasn't coming back down, then pulled out his phone and texted Chester, "You're not going to believe what just happened." She brought someone to the house, a financial consultant she's apparently worked with before, at 10 p.m. His phone rang immediately. Chester's voice was tight with concern. "Tell me everything, every detail." Fred recounted the entire evening, Marina's disappearance for 3 hours, her return with Gregory Morrison, the conversation about protecting assets, Marina's angry outburst about being protected from him rather than with him. Chester listened in absolute silence. "Fred," Chester said when he finished, his voice grave and controlled, "I need you to do something for me right now, immediately. Don't wait another second. Log into your joint bank account, the primary savings account where you keep your emergency fund." Fred's heart began to pound. "Why? Chester, what are you thinking?" "Just do it. Right now. Tell me what you see." Fred opened his laptop with shaking hands and logged into their primary joint savings account, the account where they kept their emergency fund, their safety net, the account that had held $75,000 that morning. He stared at the screen, his vision actually blurring, his hands going numb. The balance showed $1,947.82. "Chester," Fred whispered, his voice breaking, "she took it. She took almost everything. Almost $74,000 is gone." "Son of a bitch," Chester breathed. "When? What time?" Fred checked the transaction history with trembling fingers, his lawyer training from Chester kicking in even through the shock. A transfer of $73,752.18 had been initiated at 7:23 p.m., less than 2 hours after Fred had told Marina about the fake lawsuit. Less than 2 hours after his supposed financial crisis began. The funds had been moved to an account with a routing number he didn't recognize, at a bank called Pacific Northwest Trust that he'd never heard of. "She did this tonight," Fred said, his voice hollow and distant, "while she was supposedly out getting air and processing and thinking. She went straight to a bank I've never heard of, and transferred our entire emergency fund to a secret account." "That's not panic," Chester said immediately, his lawyer voice taking over. "That's not emotional reaction. That's premeditated financial manipulation. That's marital asset theft. Fred, this is serious. This changes everything. We need to document this immediately. Screenshot that account page right now. Screenshot the transaction history. Send me copies of everything. I'm coming over right now." "It's almost 11, Fred protested weakly, still staring at the numbers on the screen. "I don't give a damn what time it is. This isn't a wife panicking about money. This is criminal behavior. She's not just emotionally checked out. She's actively trying to steal marital assets. We need to protect you legally, and we need to do it before she moves any more money. I'm leaving now." Chester arrived 23 minutes later, still in the suit he'd worn to court earlier that day. Laptop bag in hand and a grim expression on his face. Together, they spent the next 2.5 hours documenting everything with meticulous detail. Screenshots of the bank account showing the transfer. Copies of every text message and email Fred had sent and received from Marina in the past 2 months. A detailed time-stamped timeline of every event, from the overheard conversation with Vanessa to tonight's confrontation. "Here's what's happening," Chester explained as they worked, his fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. "She thinks you're broke and facing financial ruin. She's positioning herself to file for divorce from the most advantageous position possible. By moving money out of the joint account immediately, she's securing liquid assets that she'll later claim were protected funds that she moved to shield from your creditors. When you eventually divorce, she'll argue these funds shouldn't be considered marital assets because she protected them." "Can she legally do that?" Fred asked, his voice still shaky. "It's legally murky and highly questionable," Chester said. Technically, it's a joint account, so she has legal access to the funds. But the timing, the intent, and the deception make it extremely problematic for her, especially if we can prove she did it in bad faith, with specific intent to defraud you in an anticipated divorce proceeding. Intent is everything in family law. Fred rubbed his face, exhaustion and emotional devastation hitting him simultaneously. 8 years, Chester. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of me working myself to death to give her a good life. And the absolute second, literally within 2 hours of her believing the money might be gone, she does this? Some people reveal who they really are when they're tested, Chester said quietly, his hand on Fred's shoulder. The question now is, how far do you want to take this test? Because we can stop right here. You can confront her tomorrow with what you know about the bank transfer, file for divorce immediately, and be done with it. You have enough evidence to protect yourself. Fred was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across Chester's laptop screen. Then he slowly shook his head. No, I need to see how deep this goes. I need to know everything she's capable of, everything she's planning. Because if she's willing to steal $74,000 within 2 hours, if she's willing to bring some stranger named Gregory Morrison to our house at 10 p.m., what else is she planning? What else has she already done? Chester looked at him seriously, his lawyer mask slipping to show genuine concern for his friend. If you're going to continue this test, we need to be extremely smart and careful. We let her think the test is working perfectly. We let her show you everything she's going to do, every move she makes, every asset she tries to hide, every lie she tells. But we document absolutely all of it, and we make sure you're legally protected at every single step. What do I do tomorrow? How do I act? You play the devastated husband facing financial ruin, Chester said. You look defeated. You accept sleeping in the guest room. You don't confront her about the money. You let her think you haven't noticed yet. And you watch, you observe, you document, and you let her keep revealing herself. Over the next week, Fred lived a double life. To Marina, he played the role of a desperate, failing businessman watching his world collapse around him. But secretly, with Chester's help and sophisticated monitoring software that Chester assured him was legal given the circumstances, he watched his wife reveal her true nature piece by methodical piece. And what he discovered was so much worse than he could have possibly imagined. Marina barely spoke to him during that week. She slept in the guest room, claiming she needed space to process the betrayal of his financial irresponsibility. But Fred knew better now. She wasn't processing. She was strategizing. He discovered the full extent of her plans when he deliberately left his laptop unlocked one afternoon while he pretended to take a shower. He'd installed monitoring software on their shared home computer, with Chester's legal guidance and approval given the circumstances of a suspected fraud, that tracked and recorded all activity. Marina didn't know that everything she did on that laptop was being documented and saved to a secure cloud server. She spent 3 hours that afternoon researching divorce lawyers, not just any divorce lawyers, high-powered, aggressive ones who specialized in protecting spouses from financially irresponsible partners and asset protection in high-conflict divorces. She filled out online intake forms for 3 different law firms. She downloaded comprehensive guides titled Protecting Your Assets in Divorce and What to Do When Your Spouse Faces Bankruptcy. But what truly shocked Fred, what made his blood run cold, was the email she sent to Gregory Morrison. He accessed it through their shared iCloud family account, which Marina had apparently forgotten gave him access to her emails. Gregory, thank you so much for coming by on such short notice tonight. You were absolutely right about everything when we discussed this last month. The situation is worse than I even feared. Fred has essentially destroyed our entire financial security through his incompetence and recklessness. I need you to move forward with the plan we discussed. Transfer the additional funds from our joint investment account into the protected trust we set up 3 weeks ago. Make sure everything is properly shielded and documented before I file for divorce. I'm meeting with the attorney you recommended, Laura Whitmore at Whitmore & Associates, tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. With the prenuptial agreement we have in place, I should be able to walk away relatively clean, but I need to make absolutely sure none of Fred's debts or legal judgments can touch me or my protected assets. How quickly can we move the rest of the liquid assets? What about the house? Can we establish that I should keep it, since I'll argue his debts make him unable to maintain it? Also, can you provide documentation or expert testimony showing that Fred's mismanagement constitutes financial abandonment under Washington state law? The attorney says that could strengthen my position significantly and potentially invalidate portions of the prenup. Thanks again for all your help. I couldn't do this without you. Our Fred read the email 4 times, his hands literally shaking, his stomach churning with nausea. The plan we discussed last month. They'd had a plan. She'd been consulting with Gregory Morrison before the supposed crisis even happened. They'd set up a protected trust 3 weeks ago, before Fred had even started his test. She was already planning her exit strategy. And the prenup? God, the prenup. They did have one, something Marina had actually insisted on when they got engaged. At the time, she'd framed it as practical and smart, since they were both professionals with separate careers and assets. Fred hadn't thought much about it. The prenup was relatively simple. Each party kept whatever assets they'd brought into the marriage, and anything acquired during the marriage would be split 50-50 in the event of divorce. Except now Marina was apparently trying to move their marital assets, money they'd accumulated together during their marriage, into some kind of protected trust before filing for divorce, which would mean those assets wouldn't be subject to the 50-50 split because they'd no longer be classified as marital assets. They'd be separate property she'd protected. She wasn't just leaving him. She wasn't just abandoning him during a crisis. She was systematically planning to rob him, to commit fraud, to steal everything they'd built together. Fred called Chester immediately, not even caring that it was almost midnight. I need to see you. Now. First thing tomorrow morning. And I need you to tell me exactly what legal recourse I have, because Marina is actively, deliberately committing fraud, premeditated fraud. She's been planning this for at least a month, probably longer. They met at Chester's office at 7:30 a.m. Fred brought printouts of everything, the emails, the browser history, screenshots of the law firm intake forms Marina had filled out. Chester's expression grew progressively darker as he reviewed each piece of evidence, his lawyer brain processing the implications. This is serious, Fred. What she's doing, moving marital assets into a separate trust with the specific, documented intent to hide them from divorce proceedings, that's textbook fraud. That's illegal. And trying to claim your supposed debts constitute financial abandonment when she knows damn well you haven't abandoned her financially or otherwise? That's filing false claims. That's potentially criminal if she follows through. So what do we do? What are my options? Chester leaned back in his expensive office chair, his fingers steepled, thinking carefully. We have 2 options. Option 1, we end the test right now this morning. You confront her with all of this evidence, the stolen money, the emails, the planned fraud. You file for divorce yourself with this documentation attached. We'd have an incredibly strong case. She'd face consequences for the fraud and asset manipulation, probably lose any claim to disputed assets, possibly face criminal charges for the theft. And option 2? Option 2, Chester said slowly, his eyes sharp, is more aggressive but potentially more effective. We let her keep going. We let her proceed with her plan. We let her file for divorce with whatever false claims and hidden assets she's planning to present. We let her walk into court and commit fraud in official legal proceedings. And then, when she's fully committed, when she's filed papers, made claims under oath, presented false financial documentation, we reveal everything. The fake crisis, the evidence of her fraud, her emails admitting to the scheme, her stolen money, all of it. We don't just divorce her, we make sure she faces serious legal consequences for what she's trying to do. Fred was quiet, processing. Option 2 was riskier, required more patience, more acting. But it also meant Marina would be caught literally in the act of committing fraud in a court of law. The consequences for her would be catastrophic. How much trouble could she actually get in? Realistically, Fred asked. Fraud in divorce proceedings is taken extremely seriously, Chester said. Asset concealment, false sworn statements, conspiracy to defraud a spouse. She could face substantial fines, penalties, court sanctions, potentially even criminal charges if the prosecutor's office wants to pursue it. At minimum, she'd lose any claim to the hidden assets completely, would probably have to forfeit her legitimate share of marital property as a penalty, and would definitely have to pay all of your legal fees. Her reputation would be absolutely destroyed. Any lawyer who knowingly helped her commit fraud could face disbarment. She'd lose everything, Fred said softly. She'd lose what she tried to steal, Chester corrected firmly. Everything she's legally entitled to under your prenup, she'd still potentially get if she'd been honest. But everything she tried to take through deception, manipulation, and fraud, gone, plus penalties. Fred thought about the woman he'd married 8 years ago in that Napa Valley vineyard, the woman who'd held him when he cried about his mother, who'd promised to love him through wealth and poverty, sickness and health. That woman was gone. Maybe she'd never existed at all. The woman who existed now was someone who'd been planning for at least a month to rob him, who'd stolen their emergency fund within 2 hours of a crisis, who was coordinating with an ex-boyfriend to commit fraud. That woman deserved to face the full consequences of her choices. "Let's go with option 2, Fred said, his voice steady and certain. "But we need to be absolutely certain we have everything documented perfectly, everything legal and defensible, everything bulletproof." "We will be," Chester promised. "But Fred, you need to be prepared. This is going to get very ugly before it gets better. She's going to file for divorce probably within the next few days. She'll make claims about you, about your financial irresponsibility, your failures, maybe much worse. You're going to have to sit through depositions and hearings and not react, not defend yourself, not reveal what you know until exactly the right strategic moment." "I understand." What Fred didn't understand yet, what he couldn't have anticipated, was just how ugly Marina was willing to make it, because she wasn't done revealing the depths of her calculated cruelty. 3 days later, on a Friday evening, Fred came home from a staged emergency meeting with creditors to find Marina in the living room with a Seattle police officer. "Mr. Bosch," the officer said as Fred entered, his hand reflexively moving toward his service weapon, "your wife has filed a police report claiming you've been making threats of violence against her. She's requested a temporary emergency restraining order for her protection. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Fred's situation." Fred's blood ran ice cold. "What? That's absolutely insane. I've never threatened her. I've never been violent toward anyone in my entire life, let alone my wife. She says you've been acting increasingly erratic and unstable since your financial problems started," the officer said, consulting his notes. "She claims you've made statements about not letting her leave, about making her pay if she tries to divorce you, about her regretting abandoning you. She says she's afraid for her safety." Fred looked at Marina. She was sitting on their expensive couch, the one she'd picked out, that he'd paid for, her face a perfect practiced mask of fear and distress. She'd even managed to produce tears, actual tears rolling down her cheeks. Her performance was flawless. "That is a complete, absolute lie," Fred said, forcing himself to keep his voice calm and measured despite the rage and shock building inside him. "Officer, I have never threatened my wife. I have never been violent. I have never said anything remotely resembling what she's claiming. This is completely, demonstrably false. Nevertheless, sir, given the allegations and her stated fear, you're going to need to come down to the station with me and make an official statement. And in the meantime, per the temporary restraining order, you'll need to vacate the premises immediately and stay somewhere else until this matter gets sorted out in court." This was it, Marina's nuclear option, her final devastating move. If she could get a restraining order against him, even a temporary emergency one based solely on her word, she could force him out of their house, control the entire narrative, and massively strengthen her divorce filing. And if Fred had actually been an abusive husband, this would be a brave woman protecting herself from danger. But he wasn't, and she knew it. She knew he'd never threatened her, never been violent, never done anything that could remotely justify this. This was pure, calculated, methodical manipulation. This was her burning down his life to get what she wanted. As the officer escorted him toward the door, Fred caught Marina's eye for just 1 second. The mask slipped, just for an instant, just a flicker, and he saw something in her expression that chilled him to his core. Satisfaction. Cold, hard satisfaction. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd checkmated him completely. She had absolutely no idea that every single thing she'd done was documented, recorded, and would soon be used to destroy not just her divorce case, but her entire life. Fred sat in Chester's conference room at 12:47 a.m., still numb with shock, disbelief, and a rage so cold it felt like ice in his veins. The police had taken his statement at the station, asked him detailed questions about his relationship with Marina, his whereabouts over the past weeks, any witnesses who could verify he'd never been violent or threatening. Chester had immediately filed emergency motions to fight the restraining order and had called in favors from 2 other attorneys to expedite the hearing. But the damage was done. Fred was temporarily barred from his own home, the home he'd purchased, that he paid the mortgage on, forced to check into a downtown hotel while Marina played the terrified victim. "This is unbelievable," Fred said for probably the 20th time, his coffee long cold in front of him. "She actually accused me of threatening violence. Me. I've never raised my voice to her in anger, never raised a hand, never done anything remotely aggressive. Ever. It's a classic manipulation tactic in high-asset divorces," Chester said grimly, pulling thick legal files from his cabinet and spreading them across the conference table. "It's disgusting, but it's effective if nobody challenges it. She needs to control the narrative completely. If you're framed as the dangerous, unstable, financially irresponsible husband, her asset grab looks like justified self-protection. If you fight back or defend yourself, you look like the aggressor proving her point. It's calculated, Fred, methodical, and it's about to backfire on her more spectacularly than she can possibly imagine." "How? How does this backfire when she has a restraining order and I'm banned from my own house?" Chester smiled, but there was nothing pleasant about it. "Because tomorrow morning, actually in about 6 hours, we're filing for divorce first, before she can file. And we're including every single piece of evidence we've collected over the past 2 weeks. The emails where she admits to hiding assets and planning fraud. The bank records showing she transferred $74,000 the same day you told her about the supposed crisis. The proof that she was planning this at least a month before your fake financial problems started. The false police report. All of it. Plus, I've been doing some very interesting investigative work on her friend Gregory Morrison." "And," Fred leaned forward, "and Gregory Morrison is not a licensed financial consultant in Washington State. He's not licensed anywhere. He's Marina's ex-boyfriend from college, University of Washington, class of 2008. They dated for 3 years before breaking up when he moved to California for business school, except he never finished business school. He dropped out after 1 semester and has been running various quasi-legal financial schemes for the past 15 years. Chester pulled up a file on his laptop and turned it toward Fred. "I hired a private investigator 3 days ago when Gregory Morrison first appeared. This is what we found. Marina and Gregory have been in regular contact for the past 8 months, long before your fake crisis started. I found social media messages, emails, phone records, everything. They've been planning this for months, Fred. Possibly as long as a year." Fred stared at the evidence. Screenshots of Facebook messages between Marina and Gregory discussing exit strategies and asset protection. Email chains about shielding funds from potential creditor claims. Phone records showing dozens of calls between them, some lasting over an hour. "The protected trust she mentioned in that email," Chester continued, "it doesn't exist in any legal filing with Washington State. It's completely fictitious. They weren't moving your money into a legal trust structure. They were just transferring your money to accounts controlled by Gregory, probably planning to split it after the divorce was finalized. It's straight-up theft disguised with legal-sounding language." Chester pulled up more files, surveillance photos that made Fred's stomach turn. Marina and Gregory having dinner at a high-end steakhouse 2 weeks before the fake crisis. Marina entering Gregory's apartment building in Capitol Hill 4 days ago, staying for 3 hours while Fred was supposedly at his office. Them laughing together over drinks at a wine bar. "She's having an affair," Fred said slowly, the final piece clicking into place. "She's not just robbing me. She's been sleeping with him while planning to rob me." "I believe so, yes," Chester confirmed. "The affair probably started months ago, maybe longer. Gregory likely approached her with the scheme. He's done this before with other women. I found evidence of him running similar scams with at least 2 other divorced women in the past 5 years. He specializes in this. He finds women in seemingly stable marriages, convinces them they deserve better, helps them hide assets from their husbands, then splits the money with them after the divorce. He's a professional con artist, Fred said. Exactly, and your wife either didn't care or actively wanted to believe it would work. Chester closed his laptop. Here's what's happening tomorrow. We file our divorce petition first thing at 8:30 a.m. when the courthouse opens. Along with it, we file a comprehensive motion to freeze all assets, every account, every investment, the house, everything. We include a detailed motion to dismiss her restraining order as fraudulent, and we attach every piece of evidence we have. Her emails admitting to hiding assets, bank records showing the theft, proof of her affair with Gregory, evidence that she was planning this before any financial crisis existed, and documentation that you were never violent or threatening. Will it work? Fred, we have documentation of everything. We have emails where she literally admits in writing to planning fraud. We have bank records showing she transferred assets within hours of hearing about your supposed crisis. We have evidence she was coordinating with Gregory Morrison for months. We have proof the financial crisis was fake, which means her entire justification for her actions collapses. And you have an alibi for every single time she claims you threatened her, security footage from your office building, credit card receipts showing you were working during the times she alleges threats occurred, everything. Chester leaned forward, his expression serious. Her story falls apart under even minimal scrutiny. And here's the beautiful part. She filed an official police report. She made statements to law enforcement under penalty of perjury. When we prove those statements were false, and we will prove it definitively, she's not just losing the divorce case. She's potentially facing criminal charges. What happens to her? At minimum, she loses any claim to hidden or transferred assets completely. She'll probably forfeit her share of legitimate marital property as a penalty for the fraud. She'll have to return the $74,000 she stole plus damages and interest. She'll pay all your legal fees, which are going to be substantial. The restraining order gets dismissed, and she could face charges for filing a false police report, which is a misdemeanor in Washington. The affair gives us strong grounds to challenge the prenuptial agreement entirely. We can argue she entered the marriage in bad faith if we can establish the relationship with Gregory predates your marriage or started during it. And if the prosecutor's office decides to pursue criminal fraud charges for the asset concealment and conspiracy, she's looking at potential jail time. And Gregory? Chester's smile was shark-like. Civil conspiracy charges, absolutely. Mandatory return of all transferred assets plus treble damages. If he helped her file false documents or participated knowingly in fraud against you, criminal charges too. He'd be destroyed financially and very possibly face serious prison time. Plus, I'm sharing our findings with the 2 other men I found who were his previous victims. Class action lawsuit potential. Fred sat back, processing everything. This was the moment, the final decision point. He could proceed with the legal nuclear option and watch Marina's entire life implode, or he could take a lesser path, settle quietly, just extract himself from the marriage with dignity and move on. But then he thought about her face when the police officer escorted him out of his own home. That flash of satisfaction, the cold calculation, the complete absence of remorse. She'd thought she'd won. She'd thought he was helpless, defeated, destroyed. She'd weaponized the legal system designed to protect actual abuse victims to hurt an innocent person. That, more than anything, made his decision clear. Do it, Fred said firmly. File everything. Let's show her exactly what happens when you try to destroy an innocent person. The next morning at exactly 8:30 a.m., Chester filed their petition. By 9:15 a.m., Marina's attorney, Laura Whitmore, the one Gregory had recommended, had received the complete documentation package. By 10 a.m., Marina was calling Fred's phone nonstop, calls he didn't answer on Chester's advice. By 11:30 a.m., Laura Whitmore had withdrawn from Marina's case, apparently recognizing the massive liability and potential ethics violations. The emergency restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. that same afternoon. Fred arrived at King County Superior Court with Chester and a paralegal carrying 3 file boxes of evidence. Marina arrived 15 minutes late with a new lawyer, a younger woman named Jennifer Mills, who looked like she'd been hired that morning on an emergency basis and had no idea what catastrophe she was walking into. The judge, a stern woman in her early 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Gregory, thankfully, called the case to order. We're here on an emergency petition for a domestic violence restraining order filed by Marina Bosch against Fred Bosch. I've reviewed the basic petition. Miss Mills, you're representing the petitioner? Yes, Your Honor, Jennifer Mills said, standing nervously. We request that the temporary restraining order remain in place while… Judge Morrison raised a hand. Before we proceed, I see there's been a responsive filing from Mr. Bosch's counsel. Mr. Alvarado, do you have a response to this petition? Your Honor, we have extensive evidence that the restraining order request is fraudulent and represents part of a calculated, premeditated plan to manipulate divorce proceedings and commit financial fraud against my client, Chester said, his voice clear and confident. Jennifer Mills stood up quickly, objecting, but Judge Morrison raised her hand again. I'll hear the evidence. Proceed, Mr. Alvarado. For the next 2 hours and 17 minutes, Chester methodically presented everything. The timeline of events, starting with the overheard conversation that prompted Fred's test, the fake financial crisis Fred created, the bank transfers Marina made within hours of learning about the supposed crisis, the emails between Marina and Gregory Morrison discussing the plan we discussed last month and moving assets to protected trusts, the photographs of Marina with Gregory at restaurants in his apartment, the social media evidence of their relationship spanning 8 months, the fact that Gregory Morrison was not a licensed financial consultant, but Marina's ex-boyfriend running a fraud scheme. And then, the critical piece, comprehensive evidence that the entire financial crisis was fabricated. Your Honor, Chester said, my client staged a fictional business crisis to test his wife's loyalty and commitment after overhearing her tell her sister she'd married him specifically for money and would immediately leave if his income declined. Everything Marina believed about the lawsuit, the frozen accounts, the financial ruin, all of it was false, created by Mr. Bosch as a test to see if his wife truly loved him or merely loved his bank account. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Marina's face had drained of all color. Jennifer Mills looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The moment Marina believed my client was broke, Chester continued, his voice measured and powerful, she transferred their entire life savings to hide them from him. She contacted her ex-boyfriend and co-conspirator to help conceal marital assets. She researched aggressive divorce lawyers specializing in protecting spouses from financially irresponsible partners. And then, when she feared my client might resist or fight back, she fabricated threats of violence and filed a false police report to force him from their home and control the divorce narrative. All of this while my client's actual financial status was completely sound. All of this while she was having an affair. All of this while she was actively planning to commit fraud. Chester presented security footage showing Fred at his office during times Marina claimed he'd threatened her. Time-stamped photos of Fred at coffee shops, restaurants, working late, all contradicting Marina's timeline. Email evidence that Fred had been nothing but supportive and concerned, never angry or threatening. Judge Morrison's expression had grown increasingly severe as Chester presented each piece of evidence. She turned to Marina, her eyes hard. Mrs. Bosch, is this true? Did you file this restraining order knowing your husband had never actually threatened you with violence? Marina's new lawyer whispered something urgent to her, but Marina seemed beyond listening to legal advice. He tricked me, she said, her voice shaking with anger more than fear. He deliberately lied about being broke. He manipulated me. He created this entire fake scenario to test whether you loved him or his money, Judge Morrison said icily. And your response to your husband facing a crisis, real or fabricated, was to immediately steal marital assets, coordinate with an ex-boyfriend to hide money, plan fraudulent legal actions, and then file a false police report claiming violence that never occurred? I was protecting myself, Marina insisted. From what? Judge Morrison's voice cut like a blade. From a man who had never been violent to you, never threatened you, who by all evidence presented here was simply testing whether your marriage vows meant anything? Mrs. Bosch, you didn't protect yourself. You revealed yourself. The judge looked at the evidence spread before her. I'm dismissing this restraining order immediately and vacating all temporary orders. Mr. Bosch is free to return to his home. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the King County Prosecutor's Office for investigation of filing a false police report. You're fortunate your husband is not pressing charges for defamation, malicious prosecution, and abusive process, though he would have substantial grounds. She turned to Fred, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Bosch, your methods were highly unorthodox, and I don't necessarily condone creating fictional crises to test your spouse. However, your wife's actions in response reveal clear criminal intent and systematic fraud. You have my sympathy for what you've endured. The hearing ended with Marina in tears, real tears this time, not the fake ones, and Jennifer Mills already distancing herself from the case. As they left the courtroom, Chester pulled Fred aside. The prosecutor's office called during the hearing. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They're very, very interested in pursuing charges against both Marina and Gregory Morrison. Over the next 3 months, Fred watched Marina's carefully constructed plan collapse completely, spectacularly, irreversibly. The divorce proceedings revealed everything to public record. Gregory Morrison was arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud and theft. Turns out he'd used the exact same scheme with 3 other women before Marina, running a sophisticated side operation, helping unhappy spouses hide assets from their partners in exchange for a percentage of the stolen money. Facing significant prison time, Gregory cut a deal with prosecutors. He testified against Marina in exchange for reduced charges, 3 years in prison instead of 10, with restitution requirements. His testimony revealed that he and Marina had been planning her exit strategy for 10 months, had opened secret accounts together, and had been having an affair for 8 months. Marina's fraud was laid bare in court in excruciating detail. The judge ordered her to return every penny she transferred, $74,000 to Fred immediately, plus another $43,000 that Chester's investigators discovered she'd moved to Gregory's accounts. She forfeited any claim to the house. She forfeited her claim to their joint investment accounts, worth approximately $190,000. She forfeited even personal jewelry and items Fred had purchased for her during their marriage as punishment for the fraud attempt. The court ordered her to pay $143,000 in Fred's legal fees. The criminal charges for filing a false police report resulted in a conviction, 9 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent criminal record. Her reputation was completely destroyed. Her social circle, the high society friends she'd cultivated through Fred's success, wanted nothing to do with her. The local business community, where she'd been networking for a potential return to pharmaceutical sales, closed ranks against her. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the revelation to her own family. Fred had maintained a genuinely good relationship with Marina's parents, Bill and Susan Alvarado, throughout their marriage. They were kind, honest people who'd welcomed Fred into their family without reservation. When they learned what their daughter had done, the affair, the systematic fraud, the false police report, the calculated cruelty, they were horrified and heartbroken. Susan called Fred personally to apologize, her voice breaking with genuine tears. "Fred, I am so sorry. We raised her better than this. We raised her to have integrity, to keep her word, to treat people with respect. I don't know what happened to her, what made her so selfish and cruel and willing to hurt someone who loved her. Please know that Bill and I are disgusted by what she did." "It's not your fault, Susan," Fred told her gently. "You're good people. Sometimes children make choices that don't reflect their parents' values." Bill was more direct when he called the next day. "She's out of the will," he said bluntly. "We've rewritten everything. We're not supporting this behavior, not rewarding it. She made her choices. She can live with the consequences. And Fred, I'm sorry we didn't see what she was. You deserve better." 6 months and 2 weeks after filing for divorce, it was finalized. Fred kept the house, all the investments, his business, everything. Marina walked away with nothing but crushing debt from her legal fees, a criminal record, a destroyed reputation, and the knowledge that her own greed had cost her everything. But Fred's journey wasn't over. The end of his marriage, as painful and disillusioning as it had been, had taught him something profound about trust, authenticity, and his own worth. He threw himself into therapy to process the betrayal and rebuild his sense of trust. His therapist helped him recognize the warning signs he'd missed: Marina's subtle isolation of him from friends who might have questioned her, her emphasis on appearances and status, her transactional approach to relationships disguised as practicality. He learned to trust his instincts again. His business thrived. The fake crisis had actually helped him identify real weaknesses in his contracts and client relationships, which he'd addressed with Chester's help. His income reached $680,000 that year, his best ever. But more importantly, he learned that his worth wasn't defined by his income. He reconnected with old friends from his community college days, from his early consulting years, people Marina had subtly discouraged him from spending time with because they weren't in our social circle. He took up hobbies he'd abandoned: hiking, photography, volunteering at a youth mentorship program, helping kids from low-income backgrounds pursue tech careers. And slowly, carefully, when he was ready, he started dating again. Her name was Sarah Alvarado, no relation to Marina's family. She was an elementary school teacher at a public school in Renton, making $54,000 a year. They met at a community fundraiser for the youth mentorship program where Fred volunteered. She had absolutely no idea who Fred was, what he did for a living, or how much money he made. She just knew he was kind, funny, genuinely passionate about helping kids, and seemed really interested in her work teaching third graders. They dated for 4 months before the subject of finances even came up, and only because Sarah noticed Fred's car, a Tesla Model S he'd purchased to replace his old Honda, and asked if electric cars were expensive. "I do okay financially," Fred had said carefully, testing her response. "I own a technology consulting business." "That's great," Sarah said genuinely, without any change in her demeanor. "My ex-boyfriend was in tech too, actually. Software engineer at Amazon. He was brilliant, but so stressed constantly, you know? Didn't know how to turn off work brain, couldn't be present. It was one of the reasons we didn't work out." "What happened with you two?" Fred asked, curious about her perspective. "We wanted fundamentally different things from life. He wanted to climb the corporate ladder, move to San Francisco eventually, make as much money as possible, buy a big house in the suburbs. I wanted to stay here near my family, keep teaching, which I know doesn't pay much, but it's my calling. Maybe buy a small house with a garden someday. We cared about each other, but sometimes caring isn't enough if your core values don't align." She smiled at him, completely unself-conscious. "But I learned what I actually need in a partner. Someone who values people and relationships and purpose over profit and status, you know?" Fred did know, and 8 months later, when their relationship was serious enough that he needed to be fully honest, he told Sarah the complete truth about his income and the Marina situation. Her reaction told him everything he needed to know about her character. "Oh my God, Fred, that's horrible," she said, taking his hands in hers. "I can't even imagine how much that must have hurt, being betrayed like that by someone you trusted completely. That must have been devastating. Not I'm glad you're wealthy, or at least you came out of it with money. Just pure, genuine empathy for his pain." "Does it bother you?" Fred asked carefully. "That I tested her, that I lied about being broke to see how she'd react?" Sarah thought about it seriously before answering. "I think you did what you needed to do to find the truth. And the truth was ugly, but you needed to know it. You didn't make her steal money. You didn't make her file false police reports. You didn't make her have an affair. You just created circumstances that revealed who she really was." She squeezed his hands. "And for what it's worth, I'd love you whether you made $50,000 or $500,000 or nothing at all. That's genuinely not why I'm here. I'm here because you make me laugh, because you're kind to everyone you meet, because you volunteer your time helping kids, because you listen when I talk about my students. That's what matters." Fred believed her, not because he was naive, but because he'd learned to recognize authenticity. And 2 years later, he married her in a small ceremony at Discovery Park in Seattle, surrounded by people who loved them for who they were, not what they had. As for Marina, Fred heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Phoenix, changed her name legally to Marina Thompson, and was working as a manager at a retail store. Gregory Morrison served 22 months in prison and was permanently barred from any financial services work. Fred had been contacted by 5 other men who'd been victims of similar schemes run by Gregory. His evidence and testimony had helped them recover over $400,000 in stolen assets collectively. Looking back on everything 5 years later, sitting on the deck of the home he now shared with Sarah, a different house than the one he'd shared with Marina, purchased specifically for new, better memories, Fred realized the test he'd run wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Not everyone needs to stage a fake financial crisis to know if their partner truly loves them. Most people never have to question their spouse's motivations. But sometimes when you have that sick feeling in your gut, when something tells you the person you love isn't who they pretend to be, you need to know the truth. You need certainty. He learned that real love doesn't crumble under pressure. It grows stronger. Real love doesn't calculate profit and loss. Real love doesn't immediately abandon you the moment things get difficult. Real love isn't transactional. And he'd learned something else, something profound that he'd share with anyone who asked. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting people face the natural consequences of their own choices. Trust is earned through actions, not words. And true love, the kind worth having, survives hard times because it was built on something real in the first place. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy integrity, character, or genuine love. And anyone who loves you only when you have money doesn't love you at all. They love what you provide. The greatest test of any relationship isn't how people behave when everything's perfect. It's how they behave when things fall apart, when the facade cracks, when the comfortable masks come off, because that's when you see who someone really is. Fred had paid a high price to learn that lesson, 8 years of his life, a painful betrayal, a difficult and public divorce. But he'd emerged stronger, wiser, more self-aware, and surrounded by people who loved him for who he genuinely was, not what he could provide them. And that, he'd learned, was worth infinitely more than any amount of money Marina could have stolen. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.